All right, I think we can get started. I want to welcome everybody to the Cayce Historical Museum. My name is Andy Thomas. I'm the Museum Office and Communications Associate. And we're glad to have so many people here to hear about our local history. If you haven't visited our museum, we'll give you more local history. So come check us out. We're open on Tuesday through Fridays from 9 to 4, and on Saturdays and Sundays from 2 to 5. You may want to check right now, before you come over. I am a one-man staff at the moment, so sometimes I have to run out. So just give me a quick phone call, and we can make sure I'm there to meet you and give you a great tour of our museum. Our museum, we like to say, it represents 4 communities in time. We look at the Congaree Indians that were here. We look at Saxe-Gotha. We look at Granby, and we also look at Cayce. So there's a lot of history there, and we have a lot of good objects, and we certainly welcome you. We also would like to welcome you back to some of our programming. Let me tell you about a couple of items we've got going on as we're going forward. On February the 17th, we're going to have a program down here. It's entitled African American Legends of Cayce. We'll be honoring some of our African Americans who have made history in the city. And I think that program is going to start at 5 o'clock and go to 6:30. We also, in March, are looking at putting together a program on railroads in the city of Cayce. We want to talk about the railroads and the history of the city. And then in April, as you know, the Doolittle's Raiders met at the Army base here. So we want to talk about Doolittle's Raiders and his famous raid on Japan. So we're working to kind of set that program up also. And then on April the 2nd, put that on your calendar, because at Tartan Day South, we're going to have a presence along with some other historical organizations. We're doing a children's colonial fair. And we'd love you to come out to see. We're going to have some people doing some blacksmithing and weaving and making sweetgrass baskets. And so we're real excited about those different aspects of that that's coming up on April 2nd. Best way you can get more information is follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, Cayce Historical Museum. Now, I want to introduce our guest speaker tonight, Mr. David Franklin. First of all, Mr. Franklin is one of our museum commissioners, and we're really happy to have him. He was born in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and he spent most of his life in Columbia, though. I think graduated from Irma High School. He also graduated from Midlands Technical College with an AS in Electrical Engineering Technology, and the University of South Carolina with a BS in Electrical and Computer Engineering. And for 30 plus years, he has worked as a software engineer, including places like NCR, AT&T, and Intel Corporation. He is also officer and member of the Greater Piedmont chapter of the Explorers Club, and his wife is here tonight, Odessa. They've been married for
28 years.
2 days. And in 2017, David was distinguished to receive the Archaeologist of the Year award from the South Carolina Archaeological Society. So we're really excited to have him here to talk about Granby. So I'm going to let him talk, and thank you so much, my friend, for being here tonight.
Okay, all right, thank you, Andy. Okay, so finding Granby is a project that's actually, we started the digging 10 years ago. We bought, well, we'll get to it in a point. We bought the house, the lot. It was back in 2010, when there was a lot of foreclosures. The house was in pretty bad shape, but we were made aware of a discovery in the area. And we bought it with the intent to have professional archaeologists come in to do some work. Well, you just can't call up somebody and ask them to do that. Back in the day, it used to be if you found something, right, you'd have archaeologists all over the place, right? And they would shut down your construction project sometimes, but that really doesn't happen anymore. But so finding Granby, so Granby really started developing after the Revolution. The British came in, they took over the what was a store at the time and turned it into a fort. That store then, they then made it a fort and they called it Granby. We'll get to this, what the name means, but they, eventually a town, a village of Granby would form after the Revolution and start building up. It's hard to put an exact date on when they really named it Granby, but in 1786, people in the upstate, they didn't like the fact that the capital was in Charleston and they wanted a more central location. So somebody looked on the map and they said, oh, well, that's Granby. And there was already a lot of commerce building between Granby and Charleston. So Granby was well known. So Granby was going to be the capital of South Carolina until the last minute, and they started saying, well, you know what, there's a lot of flooding issues in Granby, just like in the Riverland Park neighborhood where we dig. And there's illnesses. They didn't understand that mosquitoes were spreading diseases. And so they looked over the river and they said, well, what's that hill over there on the other side of the river? It was Taylor's Hill. And they decided, why don't we put a new city there and we'll call it Columbia. And over the next 20 years, really, and it took a while for Columbia to build up, but over the next 20 years, probably half the people left Granby for Columbia. And then over the next, 30 years, we know 30 years later in 1850, a description said there were only 3 families left in Granby. And that many of the houses had been abandoned and were collapsing. And we think that maybe this dig we're doing is on top of one of those collapsed houses. 15 years later, when Sherman came through, there was nothing left. But Sherman knew he'd spent time in South Carolina, and he knew he was camping at Old Granby. So our project, it's all volunteer work. We've had over 130 volunteers over the last 10 years. And you know how I got into it, I really had no interest at all in history. In fact, my dad, when I was in college, tried to encourage me to take some history courses to broaden my horizons. And I think my exact words to him were something like, no, Dad, with me, it's all about technology in the future. I think history is stupid. And I thought that for a number of years, you know, and then in 1996, my dad hosted his World War II reunion in Myrtle Beach, and that's Odessa and me right there, and that's my mom and dad right here. And we got to know all these great people, you know, it's no question about it, they were the greatest generation. We've really gone downhill quite a bit. And there's still some of them left, but after the reunion, my dad retired about 3 months later. And after having perfect health all of his life, 2 weeks later, he was diagnosed with cancer and died 4 months later. You know, I'd always thought he would outlive all of us. I was actually worried about him being all by himself in the end, you know. But you know, that's the way it is with cancer, right? You never know. And but you know, just like that, a huge piece of my life became history. And I guess that's really what changed things for me. And after that, my mom would live another 5 years, but we went to all the reunions representing my dad. And somehow or another, I got into the history of it. I caught that bug. And there was a lot of good stuff from his ship. They were in the initial invasion of Iwo Jima. My dad was a corpsman attached with a Marine group. And, you know, here's some pictures related to his ship. That's the APA 154, one of them stuck in the sand. There's quite a story behind that picture. And then this picture after my dad died, I found a newspaper clipping with this photograph, and he had a note with it. He had written this probably 1945, but he had numbers on the pictures and then names. This was his beach battalion, and he was naming them. And the medical group, the first medical group, was wiped out in 2 hours, all 12 of them. And the next group, these 3 corpsmen and 9 others went on. The 9 others were lost in just another 2 hours. So these 3 guys, they went on for 4 days nonstop. treating wounded Marines. You can see there's dead bodies here and probably body parts scattered around because this was just under a most constant mortar attack. But I did a little research and discovered that none other than Joe Rosenthal, the photographer, had snapped this picture 3 days before he took the famous flag raising photograph. And I actually sent him a copy of my dad's notes in this picture, and he called me up and talked to me for about 45 minutes, confirming that yes, this was Yellow Beach 1, where my dad was at. So you can see how this is one of the things that brought me in. Well, I also found many shipmates who the reunion had not been able to find, just using internet resources and that kind of stuff. And we solved a mystery. One young man who from the ship was listed as missing in action. His family never knew what happened to him. He was not part of the beach battalion. They figured he just fell off the ship, maybe. Well, we finally solved it, and a sailor who had been holding this secret all of his life admitted that, yeah, me and the guy volunteered to go help deliver supplies on one of these boats, and when we hit the beach, the young boy jumped out, picked up a gun. He says, "I'm going to kill me a Jap." And he said he watched him and he ran. And, Iwo Jima, the Japanese had this steep mound of black sand to slow down an assault. And they said they watched him. As soon as he got to the top, he was just instantly plowed down by enemy gunfire. He had 11 brothers and sisters, younger ones, and I think 6 or 7 brothers. They all later on served in the military in honor of him. So we notified the remaining, I think it was 2 brothers and a sister, were still living, and we let them know what happened to him after all these years, like 60 years went by. So that's what got me into history. By 2004, things were maybe starting to slow down a little bit with the reunion group, and Odessa and I, that's our son, Jeremy, we bought a lot on the Broad River between the Broad River Road Bridge and the I-126 bridge. And while clearing the lot, we discovered a man-made rock structure. At first, didn't have any idea what it was, but there was a roadbed going to it on each side of the river. Things in the middle of the river. On the other side of the river, it was actually an old roadbed lined with dead oak trees. So it was pretty old. And but everything pieced together, it all looked like a bridge abutment. And nobody knew exactly where the Confederate Broad River Bridge was located. A marker says it was downstream from today's bridge, which would have been in the area of our yard. And this drawing from an artist traveling with Sherman shows Sherman's pontoon bridge being built next to the burnt bridge. And so for about 2 years, I thought this was in our backyard. And I was just doing all the research I could do, but I kept hitting dead ends, things that contradicted other things. And I was at the point of just completely giving up. And I decided, well, I'm going to go to the South Carolina Archives one more time. And I went in, and there was a new card in the card catalog. I'd just been there a few months before. And it said an 1870 survey of the Columbia Canal. And so in 1974, a man named Gordon Green, he was an employee for the Richland County, and his boss told him to go out to this shed somewhere and just throw away everything in the shed. Well, he knew there was this old survey in there, and he says, "I'm not going to throw it away. I'm going to take it home." And he took it home, and over the years, he and his son would pull it out right before they'd go canoeing down the Broad River or the Congaree and point out stuff. And while I was doing this research, Gordon Green died, and his son didn't know what to do with the survey, but he wanted to share it, so he gave it to the South Carolina Archives. And probably the card was put in there the day before I came in, when I was about to give up. But when I looked at it, I knew it's not moving backwards here. I don't think it's going to let me do that. Well, I knew, we'll get back to it here in a minute. I knew it when they brought it out, it was 12 feet long. They unrolled this thing. And it was a 5-mile-long survey. It was commissioned by one of the richest men in the world, a U.S. Senator from Rhode Island, and was completed by the state surveyor of Rhode Island. And so when I decided, yeah, and immediately when I saw it, I saw the Broad River Bridge and that pontoon bridge crossing, which was a ferry, and I knew this is not in my backyard. But I decided to continue on with it, and what I found was doing an overlay, grabbing the outlines. I found that down in Cayce, 5 miles down, there was absolutely no error in the survey. And moving up, here's the Gervais Street Bridge. Now, it had not been rebuilt in 1870, but the surveyor marked where all the piers were. And sure enough, today, if the river's really low, you can see the remnants of these right exactly where he shows them. And going all the way back up on the Broad River, this is where it showed the newly rebuilt bridge, which was burned by the Confederates. And there's that ferry crossing, just like the drawing that was made when Sherman came in. So I ran down there immediately and discovered an old roadbed right here. And there was a structure very similar to what was in our backyard, a bridge abutment, and more things on the other side of the river. So I was so excited. I went to all the historians, South Carolina Archives, the state archaeologists, and tell them about it. And they said, David, you can't trust an old map. And I said, but it's not an old map. It's a survey, and there's no error in it. I said, and even the state archaeologist, said, well, still it's circumstantial evidence. It doesn't count. And I couldn't get anybody involved. So here I am at the point of giving up again. And I watched History Detectives, and at the end of the show, they put up this thing about submitting your own story. So I said, well, I'll just try this, take a shot. 2 weeks later, a producer calls me up, and she says, Mr. Brinkman, did you know that our season is over? She says, you're a little bit late. We had like thousands of entries this year. I said, okay, oh well. She says, but my boss just called me up yesterday and said, we have just enough money to do one more show. And he said for me to come in this weekend and pick out of all those thousands of submissions to pick one of them. And she says, I got here at work and I don't have access to it. The only thing I see is this email about your story. So guess what? All of a sudden, all these historians and the state archaeologists, this is his favorite show. Oh, everybody jumped on the bandwagon then, right? So History Detectives came to town and they proved it. They still were saying, oh, that survey is circumstantial evidence. You got to go there and prove it with archaeology. So they went there and they proved it. So the case was solved. And all of a sudden, all these things fell into place. I'd been researching all the crossings on the Broad River and the Congaree, and everything fell into place. What was in our backyard was a 1793 Compton's Bridge, which was really the first. These two were the first two bridges on the Broad River down near Columbia. And so all those little weird things that happened, they happened at all of these things that we came, some kind of miraculous thing. And that's why I wrote the book called Miracles to Yesterday. It was telling about how all these things happened and then also talking about the history. But getting back to the survey, so this is the part down in Cayce, the same 1870 survey, and it shows a creek coming out. This is the Columbia Quarry. Cayce Quarry is right here. So it shows a creek coming out. Here's where the old Columbia Canal used to end. And I was also very familiar with another great survey from 1818. This is amazing how accurate this is. And it was done by Professor Blackburn, who used position of stars and stuff somehow or another to come up with this. And the Mandrake Coat, I think, was the actual surveyor who did it. But it shows that same creek. And back in 1818, Granby was still there. And it shows that creek coming out on the northern end of the on the other side of the river of the main square of Granby. So that kind of told us, given that overlay, just where Granby was. So I pieced together, and this was the main square of Granby. This is the Riverland Park neighborhood. This is the green dot is where we're digging. So that house we found, we got word of something that was found here. And we ended up, we got another strange kind of miraculous thing that came over us, and we said, we're going to buy this lot and we're going to prove that this was Granby. This is where the old state road used to go. This is where Fort Granby, the Cayce house, used to stand, this building is a replica of that. You can see that it's now in the quarry hole. And this was the road to Friday's Ferry. And I think this is a picture from D.C. Locke, who's here. So D.C.'s an archaeologist that's been working. He and his wife have been working with Granby, and actually the Robichaud family here too was involved from the very beginning, even pit number 1. And but D.C. took this picture when the river was very low, and a local surveyor who was also a history buff had figured out also about the same time I did where the road to Friday's Ferry was, and he went out the Congaree River and he found this. Now the river was higher; he actually saw it underneath the water, and he had the Institute of Archaeology come out. They did a core sample, and they said, "Yep, this is from 1800." And then they also found the roadbed going to it, Friday's Ferry Road. South Carolina history. I do software stuff. These were some apps I did, historical markers in the Columbia area. This is the area of Cayce you were talking about. There's one marker there. This is Charleston, just one little part of Charleston. So of course you'd say the history is in Charleston. But Leo Redmond, the former director of the Cayce Museum, this was a statement he used to say all the time. This is where the history is. It's in Cayce. It's not in Columbia. And some people, I think, might even argue there's more of it here than there is in Charleston, actually. And this is William Shumpert. He was the local surveyor that he put all these plats together. That's how he found the location of Friday's Ferry. And which leads, and really I've kind of narrowed it down. There's really a 1 square mile of area that now holds evidence of every century of continuous human habitation, 12,000 years. There's nowhere else in the United States that can claim that. Not even Charleston. In England, Stonehenge is only like 11,500 years. So what are the signs of this history? Well, here's some of the things that have been found over the last 50 years. Saxgotha, the first backcountry settlement, the first Fort Congaree 1. Fort Congaree 2 was found as part of our project, our Granby project. St. John's, and I was just talking to the gentleman here earlier. I guess they couldn't stay, but he actually knows some stuff about St. John's too. And then of course Granby and the work that we've been doing. But 12,000 years, 96% of that is Native American, and we don't know a whole lot about that. So that's something we'd like to learn more about and try to include that. This is the one building that remains of Granby. It's at the Lexington County Museum property. It's actually one of the nicer looking buildings, even though it's one of the older ones. This was a law office in Granby in the 1790s, and it was rolled on logs. It wasn't dismantled, rolled on logs all the way to Lexington, where it became the first post office of Lexington. And this is good quality stuff. This is like what you'd see at Colonial Williamsburg. So that's why we kind of tell people that Granby probably looked like Williamsburg. Maybe things were spread out a little more and not quite as many buildings. And then the Granby Cemetery, which is in the quarry property. The quarry did recently make an attempt to clean it up some. It had been neglected for many years. And here's kind of the area of the 12,000 year park. Unfortunately, the quarry has dug up or covered 2/3 of where Granby was, and now they're working on getting the Riverland Park neighborhood for another big hole. So this is in danger. We'll get back to that in a minute. But so how do you prove history? Well, archaeology is a way to do it, and these are kind of the different phases that you go through. Background research, you look at the history you have, and from here, the first history of our country is when Hernando de Soto came in, and anthropologists over the years have figured out, because de Soto had 4 men that were writing logs, and they whenever they encountered some obstacle like a river or stream, they wrote details about it, and they were able to figure out what his path was from this. And in the Columbia area, it's believed that DeSoto crossed between the ford that's behind the Columbia, the Broad River Road Correctional facility. There's a ford there. It's still there today. And there was also a ford at Fort Congaree, too. It's not there anymore. So we believe that DeSoto, when they got to a big river, they would go up and down. They'd send men to find the easiest place to cross. So that's just an example. That's just one piece of the history, but you would look at all of that. You would put together plats. Here's a plat, the John Matthews plat from, I think it was like 1730 or something. It is actually where Granby would be located. Martin Friday, kind of considered the father of Granby. He owned this big chunk up here, but John Matthews would later sell his property to Indian trader Thomas Brown. Now, Brown originally started at Fort Congaree 1, which is further south here, down more towards 77. And he was kicked out, though. So Fort Congaree 1 became a trading post. It never really did much as a fort. And Brown the trading post was very popular. Lots of natives were coming in and out, and the Europeans that lived there were uncomfortable with all this activity. So they kicked Brown out, and he moved up into this area and eventually bought this property, which would become Granby. He bought that from John Matthews. One of those plats in there shows Fort Congaree 2 on it. And this is where we expected it, because the Saxe-Gotha survey from the 1730s showed a reservation for a fort, which would be about right here. But this actually was from 1750, after the fort was built. And it shows it relative to a pond here. And we did, again, another overlay here. And I lined it up with, because there's this flood in the Riverland Park neighborhood. When it floods, this is the first part that goes underwater. This is the elevation map, and it's the same shape as this pond, which would put the fort right here. Now, the red is where the Saxe-Gotha survey said it should be. So we went over to these people's house, knocked on their door, told them about the history of Fort Congaree 1, and asked them if we could dig up their front yard. and I'll get back more on that in a minute here. So fieldwork techniques, geophysical survey, which is non-destructive, and digging is destructive. The archaeologists use geophysical survey to prove Sherman's Crossing. They did that with a gradiometer, which the ground is 4% iron, and over thousands of years, that iron magnetizes to align with the Earth's magnetic field. So if you come along, you dig a hole, or you make a road, or you got a lot of people standing around, carriages and thousands of horses, it's going to leave a big disturbance area. And they found that. They found the old roadbed and this parking lot for Sherman. They found it with this simple little device. It's actually a simple device, but they charge like $30,000 for it. And so that was the case where we proved this historical marker was wrong. And so digging, of course, we all know what that is, and sifting, we do that a lot in Granby. Kids love to do it. They love to get in the hole for some reason. And this is that front yard of those people. Within 2 hours, we found archaeological features of a palisade wall. The state archaeologists made us work the entire summer, though, continuing and finally ending with more geophysical survey to prove that this was Fort Congaree 2. And so artifacts, when you dig, you find artifacts. This is a sample from one hole with some pretty neat stuff we found. Notice that's kind of an indigo blue color, which indigo was made in Granby. And this was found very deep in the ground, this cloth-like material. And archaeological features. So this is a post hole. It's probably the post was left in place and it left a dark stain. So this is why archaeologists use trowels. They don't want to miss something like this. And the state archaeologist, whenever we found something like this, he said, that's it, you can't dig anymore. We're not going to destroy it. So we knew there were lots of artifacts under there, but we couldn't get to it. This hole here was probably where a post was removed. You can actually see where it was pushed, pulled, maybe pulled out, and then it filled in with a lighter color soil. So archaeological features are very important, but that's why you have to be so careful with digging. We really don't. We're not all that careful in Granby as we were in Fort Congaree too, and we've only broken a few pieces of pottery. But the archaeological features are the things you'll lose if you're not being really careful. So this was that palisade wall feature. Somebody said, "Oh, that's just," a volunteer said, "Oh, that's somebody just parked their car in the middle of the yard and they changed the oil and spilled some oil." And but no, an archaeologist would say no. You can see post holes in here, and some post holes you can't see. You have to feel it, which you can do with a trowel. It'll be usually softer, so they can feel around the spot. Laboratory analysis, that might be, identifying pottery types, maybe carbon dating on different things. And then the last stage of archaeology is interpretation and write-up. So one of the things I did, unique things that I had was software development. I did a virtual reality presentation of the fort, what we believed it looked like. And, so you get in virtual reality and you put the headset on and you're seeing its life size, and you think when you're standing up here on the Palisade Wall deck, you actually you feel dizzy because it's about a 15-foot drop there. So that's just a way people can experience that. The Catawbas were a friendly Indian. We know they had a camp outside the fort, and the neighbor on the south side said he found lots of arrowheads, so I put the camp over there on that side. That's how we determined that location. And one of the barracks in the fort, we actually have pictures in there of the dig, and the pictures are actually three-dimensional also. So now we're going to go to that's how archaeology works. Now I want to show you the top finds in Granby, which kind of tell the story of the history in that area. And these are the current artifact totals, 25,000. And you can see a lot of pottery, stoneware, and kitchenware pottery, kitchen glass, window glass. As you will see as we go on, the people of Granby, it was documented they were very wealthy, and window glass is a sign of that. It was very expensive. It was tax assessed separately from your house. But we also find older things. So the site dig we're on is not unusual at all in archaeology. It was built on top of something else. Something else was there before that. And this is the oldest piece, probably, maybe 10,000 years old. So it's a Dalton point. Actually, your brother was there, Dave, when we found this one. And so we were done with the hole. In Granby, all the artifacts we find from Granby are in dark soil. As soon as the dark soil goes away, the artifacts from Granby disappear. And that's because in Granby, they were burning fires all the time to cook and to keep warm. So you get this charcoal that goes into the ground after doing that for decades. And you can see it in the aerial photos from 1939 when they had plowed the ground. You can see these black spots. Archaeologists often use that as something to guide them to where humans were living. So this one we had dug, it turned soil completely changed to a light color, and we were cleaning it up, and there was all of a sudden a little chain. And we went a little deeper, and this popped out. So who knows what we might have found if we'd gone twice as deep, in all of these holes, but that's a lot of work. So here's another almost certainly Native American. So we found this little, probably area this big, these little pieces of charcoal, looked like just enough that would come out of a pipe bowl. And in it were seeds, which looked like possibly wild tobacco seeds. And there's a really good interview that was done with a Native American woman about the year 1900, and I think she was over 100 years old then. And she said that the natives liked to smoke, especially in ceremonies. They liked to smoke the seeds of tobacco, and the Europeans did not like that. So we believe this is Native American. It might be really old. This would be maybe something good to do a carbon dating on to find out just how old it is. And then, of course, Native, the land in Granby after, probably may have even been plowed when Sherman came through. We think it's been plowed for maybe over 100 years. So the artifacts we find are broken up, but we get lots of different Native American pottery types. Here's a nutter for breaking nuts open and tools to cut with. And those are the points that we found. That's the Dalton point right there. And then the Jews' harps. Now this is where we connect with Europeans. So that first Indian trader, Thomas Brown, when he died in 1747, the largest number of items in his inventory were Jews' harps. So the natives apparently love these things. They're musical instruments, and the tongue is broken off. Both of these we found with charcoal deposits. So it's like they were playing the instrument, it broke, and they threw it in the fire. But it's made out of brass. The state archaeologist thinks this is early 1700s, which would point to Thomas Brown. And again, that plat, this is Thomas Brown's property. Here was Fort Congaree 1, but this was Brown's property. This is where we are digging, and this is the ferry site crossing right here. This bottle, we got the bottom and the top piece, and those two together told us this was late 1730s. So again, before Fort Congaree 2, but during the time period of Thomas Brown. And then English Brown salt glaze stoneware. This has a big range on it, but some of what we find, it looks very primitive, and we think it might be from the Brown period also. And then post holes. Where we found those Jews' harps in this area, we also found a lot of post holes. The Granby house, which was built on top of the site later on, was built almost certainly on brick foundation segments. So post holes would have, you could have had post holes for the front porch or for tying your horse up, but it could be from the Thomas Brown cabin. His structure would have been a log cabin. This item we found and didn't really identify it until maybe 4 or 5 years later. When I looked at it a second time and noticed, if you can see this faint imprint on it, like a stamp, it is a Jerusalem cross. And these are some samples. They were weights that were used. So particularly with traders, that people would bring in gold and they needed to be able to weigh the gold coin to make sure it was really gold and it's really the right size. But this thing has been kind of shaped so that it has the exact weight of a gold. It was a gold 4 escudo, I guess is how you pronounce it. And so it would have looked something like this. You put the Spanish coin in over here and you make sure that it balances with the weight. So we believe this is probably also Thomas Brown here. In 2015, we had the flood. This is where that pond is. This is what the pond looks like when it reappears. And this is before it got bad. I think this house was up to halfway up the door. Many of these houses this time were just abandoned, I think, and some of them have been torn down, and the quarry has bought up some of them. And right across the street from our dig site, there used to be a little community building here. They tore it down to make a new one. This is where the phase 2 of the river walk comes out. And after all that, the Congaree River came up over this. And then you had all the rain, and there was they had already stirred up the dirt here, clearing out things. And we picked up over 600 artifacts here. And the coolest one was almost a complete pipe bowl. And it had 4 maker marks on it, which narrowed it down to the year 1740 to 1750. So now that brought up the question, okay, well, that could be Thomas Brown, or it could be Fort Congaree too. How will we ever know? The borehole says it's 1720 to 1750 also. And really, pipe stems, we always get excited when we find these because you can date them by the borehole size. And so when these things when they smoked them, they made it long because they would clog up and you could just snap the end off. So you find these pieces that are about that long. And you can date them and you can see that this period is where most of them came from. We got, 4 of them that came from before that. And there were some Indian traders around before Thomas Brown, so that could have been them. And then these are almost certainly the newer ones are from the Granby period. And the depth find, notice the age goes with the depth. The older ones are found deeper. Even though this was plowed, things still seem to kind of stay in the same general location. And then recently we've had some bottle finds, which kind of clear up things. This one particular bottle was, so this is based on what's been found in colonial Williamsburg. And this particular bottle had a base diameter, we could get that from this piece here, of 5 1/4 inch, which really there was only one bottle type like that made in 1750. So now we clearly see this is not Thomas Brown, this is Fort Congaree too. So now, and the same thing with these bottles, 1756, a top piece and a bottom piece. So now we're beginning to think, well, most of those pipes then, and a lot of these bottles are probably Fort Congaree too. And why was that? Fort Congaree too was found 1,000 feet south of our Granby dig site. Why were they coming up here? Well, it was the crossing. Martin Friday didn't start that crossing, his ferry, until after Thomas Brown died, but there was a crossing there before. So we believe that these guys were moving back and forth in that area quite a bit. So back to this picture, so there's Bill Schumpert who found the ferry site. There it is again. And but that structure, I was always kind of wondering, well, they call it a ferry, but could it have been Wade Hampton, one of his bridges? He built 3 bridges in the 1790s. They were all ended up washing away, but the most magnificent one was made in 1796. And there's a couple of really cool descriptions of it. That it was, one was stated it was the largest building in South Carolina, which makes me wonder, was it a covered bridge? If this was a covered bridge, it would be maybe the first one in the United States. But it was a curvilinear. It's definitely the first curvilinear bridge. This never really caught on. Hampton wasn't a bridge engineer, but he somehow thought that shaping a bridge like this would give it more strength. But it still came down to the pilings, and debris getting caught in the pilings. And so here's another look at it, and what we see in the river. So we know this is where it landed on each side, but if it were curvilinear, we should find something up here. And sure enough, when the river was really low, this aerial photo shows what I think are load points where piers were put in over the main center arch. So the rest of the bridge had lots of pilings, piers, but the centerpiece had to be open for traffic to flow through. So they needed something really strong here. I want to get divers down here to test it, because documentation says that Hampton had these put into the riverbed with lead. They melted lead around the piling, so we could verify that pretty easily, I think. In the Granby Cemetery, now we're going to shift over to Cayce, where we first see Cayce come along here. There's the grave of Anne Friday, who was the great-granddaughter of Martin Friday. She married James William Cayce. She died. They were not married that long. But then William's second wife, Elizabeth Ray, inherited the Cayce house from her mother, Anne Giger. She had acquired it through Major Daniel Tateman, who bought the building from Chestnut and Kershaw at the end of the Revolutionary War. So this is what the Cayce Museum is modeled after. And this is a 1900 picture. And what's interesting is this was special to get a picture taken back then, I guess. And they brought this table out here. It looks kind of strange there to see a table just sitting out, but obviously this had some kind of importance to it. And if you go upstairs, you'll find it. It is the Cornwallis table, who was the commander of British troops in the South during the Revolutionary War. And remember, this was Fort Granby, that building during the Revolutionary War. Here's the original marker. This stood at the site of the original Cayce house, which the first quarry did not take care of it well, and it collapsed, and people, I think, walked away with all the wood from it, so we lost it, and now it's in the quarry hole. This was like the most significant Revolutionary War thing in the Midlands of South Carolina. That was in the 1930s, 40s, so people were worried about other things back then, I guess. But this just talks about that it was originally a trading post. British took it over 1780 after the fall of Charlestown, and it was known as Fort Granby by 1781. In February 1781, the fort was besieged unsuccessfully by General Thomas Sumter. And on May 1st, and this is important to our Granby dig site, Lieutenant Colonel Henry Hampton attacked a British detachment guarding Friday's Ferry. Hampton's men killed 13 of these people from Fort Granby, these British-related people, and then they attacked a smaller group trying to get back to the fort and killed 5 more of them. Then finally, on May 14th, Francis Marion and Lieutenant Colonel Henry Lee, the father of Robert E. Lee, laid siege on the fort, and it was captured on May 15th. So here's our dig site. These are the holes. We've dug 138 holes now. These are the ones where we have found balls. This is a 60 caliber one here. Here's the ferry crossing. So Hampton's men, I think, were coming up in this direction. So the question is, were some of these balls from that event? You can't date musket balls. That was kind of a frustrating thing in our dig. How can we really attach this to the Revolutionary War? And there's that statement again about the Hampton's attack. Well, just in the last year, DC here found a Hessian military button. There were from 1781, but there were a lot of these reproductions from the early 1900s. This is not a reproduction. The repos are flat. This one comes out. This part of the button comes out, and it's just heavier in general. So we have the real thing here. It had the words in Latin, which translate into "God is our hope." And so during the American Revolution, the British hired 30,000 German troops. Now these were people from the area where Germany would form, and they were very feared soldiers. And the British needed help to try and deal with all these patriots, and they brought these guys in to do that. So the question becomes, we know there were 60 of them at Fort Granby, so were they part of that group that got killed, or maybe after the surrender they were walking out and one of them dropped their button? They may have had to also give up their uniforms, but I'll get back to that later. So and then just again, Francis Marion and Lee, and here's also upstairs this really nice painting of so this was Lee. This was that on the May 14th where they set up a cannon and besieged the fort. And beautiful painting here. Of course, the fort was really not this close to the river, but it looks nice. Yeah. And then we also have Emily Giger connected to this, the Revolutionary War heroine who delivered on horseback. She was a teenager, and it was a pretty dangerous mission. She delivered a message from General Nathaniel Greene to General Sumter, and she was captured and taken to Fort Granby. But the British were pretty decent people, and they put her in a room. They said, "Well, we can't search you. We got to bring in a woman to do that." So while she was waiting there, she read the note and ate it, and then they had to let her go, and she completed her mission. So here's a kind of a picture of our dig site, all the holes we've dug. The red is really good. That's where we find lots of stuff. We've kind of sampled all around, and we've dug even in a neighbor's yard and found some things there. But we also break up the data and graphically show the 13 categories of artifacts, and to look for patterns. And here's one here. So this is brick that we find. This is building glass, windows, and nails. And if you notice, it seems like there's a red line going here, 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 and when you combine those three groups into what we call architecture groups, you see definitely a line here, which I think is the wall of the building. What was that? Oh, okay. Okay. I felt. So this is how we really feel like this, but down here now previously doesn't show up here, but there were nails down here, but no window glass and not as much brick. So what's happening down there? And when you look at stoneware pottery, wow, you start seeing a lot. It's huge right down in here. So we believe the actual house structure was right here, and that this is a storage building here. So that's just gives you an example what you can tell by just looking at the different artifact types, doing these individual holes and then looking at all that data. So we believe the owner of the house, the Granby house, was Samuel Johnston. We find him in the 1800 survey, which was nice because that was the one year they separated Granby out I said survey, the census. They separated Granby out, and they had the Johnston family there. We find, I've got this over here, these are barrel bands. So I had this little custom barrel made here with Friday's Mill and Distillery, Village of Granby, 17. We find buttons and buckles. This one is probably I'm trying to correct myself, DC. It's from the war between the states. He doesn't like to hear Civil War. And wine glasses, probably another sign of wealth. This particular one was actually found in our neighbor's yard, I think. This is one found in Williamsburg. Here's a pipe bowl. If you turn it at the right angle, it looks like an alligator. And a lot of pipe bowls had alligators in them because the Europeans, I guess, were fascinated with that. Tobacco came from here, and they were making these pipe bowls, and they thought, well, why don't we put alligators on some of them? And here's another unique item. This is the all-seeing eye, and it comes on a pipe that dates to 1720 to 1750, which probably means it was the fraternal society, one of the early ones called Oddfellows. So the maker of the pipe was probably a member of Oddfellows. And this, we don't know. This is really interesting. It's like a little ball that has been cut right through here on the pipe. Is that like a special message from sonic message, or these from the society? We don't know. And then bricks. So we don't count bricks as artifacts. We weigh it and we compare the pits with the weight. But if we did count them, we'd be well over 100,000 artifacts. Some states, they do count them. And then, of course, iron. I have that display over here. And here's a really unique piece that we found. We didn't know what this was until maybe a year later, and I came across this in colonial American artifacts, and I'm looking through, and there it is right there. And then we looked in the Congaree store account, which is upstairs also. So the Cayce Museum acquired this really neat account book, which I think covers about 3 or 4 years. It's got beautiful handwriting in it. We had a woman that was working on her master's actually indexed the whole thing so you could search it and sort it and do all kinds of things with it. And so this is a 9-inch stock lock from England. There was only one sold during that time, and it was bought by Jacob Giger. So we think Jacob Giger was the one who built this house. Maybe and show you something else later on that. So this is really cool, and you can link all this historical information with an artifact. The store account book, here's its sales, and all of a sudden, right here, what is that? March of 1786. It's like they closed. Columbia was created. That's when the announcement of Columbia came along. But then I think a month later they realized, oh well, it's going to take a while to build Columbia. You know, we're going to get a lot of traffic coming through here. So the store came back in about that time. And here's just some of that data. The Hampton brothers were the biggest customers. There's some other familiar names: James Taylor, Thomas Taylor, Siebels, and some names here that are. There's Christian Theus right there, minister. Weber, there's a Weber. And then the top item is rum, sugar, salt, thread, shoes, hats. There's no beer, and I like beer. I'm not a wine drinker or hard liquor drinker, but there's no beer in here, and we don't know. I'm trying to figure out, did anybody have any beer then? Because we know, I think it was barley. Somebody was assigned the job of maybe growing barley or some component of beer, and he failed miserably here. So there may not have been any. But yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, and this is one of our coolest finds. So this is a Mexico City minted, and of course the real beauty of it is it's the only coin we found. But look at that date, 1786. So this is probably those people coming through Granby that were building Columbia, and they dropped this. This now, people ask me, it's about the size of a dime, you know, and I tried to figure out the value of it back then. I think it was probably like, you could have probably bought one shoe with this. You couldn't buy a pair, you could buy maybe one shoe, so it's not that valuable. And here's the old Granby Coin. This was actually disassembled and rebuilt at the site of the First Presbyterian Church in Columbia. And it was there until the 1940s when they destroyed it. I don't know what happened. I don't have, people took souvenirs from it, but that's what it would have looked like, the Granby Courthouse, which is really not that far from our, we're in, where we're digging, it was the main square of Granby, so this was very close to it. And there's that building I already showed you. There's a number of these, there's lots of ads, with commerce between Granby and Charleston, and in 1786 there was the Taylor family owned this property where this is our dig site. Fort Congaree 2 is right here. The Taylor family owned this, and they were trying to get rid of it. They knew, this property's not going to be worth anything. Let's try to sell it right now. And I don't think they ever did, but I don't show it here, but further down it actually shows the St. John settlement, which is very, very important because this was a survey again, very accurate. There's just some more about moving hogsheads of tobacco. So Granby was also one of 2 tobacco inspection stations in South Carolina. So there was a lot of tobacco coming in to Granby and being sent down to Charleston. Just some more stuff there. And in 1791, George Washington came here. This is another painting from upstairs. You can actually see the old State House. They had that depicted here. Wade Hampton, I think this is Wade Hampton here, maybe. Is that Wade Hampton? Okay. And who is this? Taylor. Okay, yeah. So there they are. So Wade Hampton was in the middle of building this first bridge, but George Washington had to take a ferry across because the bridge wasn't ready to go yet. I wish he had shown a little bit of that bridge construction down here. But and so here's some of the data. Now I need to update this, but here's an ad we found, and I think this is our house. So this is 1790. That Samuel Johnston guy, he had just gotten married when this ad came out. And the house, it's for a house that's 100 yards from the ferry crossing, which is where we are here. And it says that it's a nice house and store. Now, when they say store, that means the house was also a store where they sold things, or was that a storehouse? I'm not sure, but we found this stuff that makes us think this is a storehouse. And it says there's also maybe some other buildings here too. We know they had slaves from the 1800 survey. In fact, another sign of wealth in Granby is that there was about the same number of slaves as there were white people in Granby. Now, Lexington County, it was a lot lower than that. It was maybe 25% of the population was slaves. And another sign that Granby was very wealthy. It also mentions that it had a good well in the yard. We've been looking for that, but that may not be practical to find something like that. We found some things here, could be a privy. Then most recently, what I have to add here is what we think are slave quarters. The lot, I think it says it's 1/2 of an acre. So the slave quarters would need to be somewhere, in about this area here. This is a house from 1817, drawing made in 1817 of Friday Arthur's house. The cemetery for this family is right where Steel Hands Brewery is. You might notice in the front they put a nice iron gate around it to protect it. So they own that land, and this was a drawing of their house. And I think this is probably what our house looked like. You can see looks like brick foundation segments here. Nails, Richard and Wade Hampton bought lots of these. This is a unique one because it has no rust on it, so we think maybe it was somehow preserved. Maybe it still had the oil covering on it from after it was made. I mentioned before these artifacts that have the indigo blue color found deep. Indigo was a big product in Granby, which even further added to the mosquito problem that they had, because you had to have standing water, I think, to make this stuff. And then here's another really neat, and this would have been really expensive, this coffee pot. We only found one piece of it, but it was enough to identify it as the type of pottery, what the pottery was made of, and this. So another sign this would have been very expensive import. Pottery, this is just from one hole, and you can see this greenish blue tint. This is pearlware, which was made between 1790 and 1810. So again, this is Granby period when we find stuff like this, and you can spot it pretty easily. Bottles, again, now here's a bottle, a top, bottom piece here coming together for the year 1804 and 1800. Another thing we notice about the glass is it's very smooth from this period, Granby period, very smooth. The glass from 1750 is very rough, so better quality. And here's an interesting one, Black Man Billy. So the $50 reward, that must have been a lot of money back then. But so this is Nicholas Hayne. He was a long time, maybe the longest person to live in Granby. And there were several generations, I think, of Nicholas Haynes. But so this slave disappeared. He's about 30 years old, looks young for his age. He's got some big separations between his teeth. And I think it says somewhere in here where he speaks very well. I can't remember exactly where I saw that, but his clothing are what you would see in a white person, and cap, very fine cap. But Nicholas believes that a white person gave him a free pass and that he may be headed north. So even though he probably lived a lot better than other slaves did here in Granby, he was obviously not happy with it, maybe, and left. So this is another part of the story. We don't have a lot of information on Native Americans, but we also don't have a lot of information on the African American slaves either. But more than natives, though. So this is something we could probably research a lot. This is where we believe we found the slave quarters. You see this, the white color means we didn't find a lot of artifacts there, but that's where that button was found, though, too. It's another interesting point to make, that Hessian button. But the reason we went here is the 1939 aerials. And we lined them up with today's aerial with these common landmarks. zoomed in, and this is the line we're really looking at right here, because if you look closely, it looks like separate, maybe 4 different like rectangular shaped buildings. So could that have been slave quarters? And in fact, what we find is if you compare it to, there's a standard for Carolina slave for archaeological sites that describe the kind of artifacts they find. And we find nothing but very plain white pottery, but also a lot of shell. This is like seafood shell. We don't find any of that around the Granby house, but we found several pieces here. And African Americans, their culture was a lot of eating seafood. So that's found in a lot of the slave archaeological sites. And chalk also, they use chalk in like for religious or ceremony things. They would use that, and we've found chalk there also. And then that button, it brings up the question, we found that button there. Could that have been, did a Hessian uniform, was it? Certainly the Hessians, when they surrendered, they wouldn't have been going, a lot of them stayed here. And they probably would not have been wearing their uniforms, right? They lost the war. They probably gave that up, and maybe it ended up in the hands of slaves. And maybe this button belonged to a slave, and it came off there. Or maybe it could be from the Fort Granby activity. And then there's Sarah Friday. So she was the granddaughter, I think, of Martin Friday. And she did a drawing based on her memory from 1810 of Granby. This was, we've been looking for this. It was in this South Carolina library. This is the northern end of Granby. So here is the Cayce house. Friday's Entertainments, which was her uncle, I believe, or maybe her father. There is a Pete the Barber, is right here. And Captain Hart. So Captain Hart, this is actually, the quarry has destroyed this, but this is actually in an open piece of land. It looks like nothing has ever been built there, so this would be maybe a good spot for archaeology. But you also had the distillery, the mill. This is all gone from the quarry. And down in here, here's the Hain property. And the town square is right here. Here's the courthouse. And Sarah gives a little hint here about how the state road took a turn. And here's where we're digging our house is right here. This is one of the law offices, that building that was saved. And it just says, I forget the wording on that, but it's a part of Samuel Johnston. So that means multiple buildings were here. And that's it. That's the southern end of Granby. And when you do so based on what Sarah gave, this turn in the old state road, this is where Granby was. You had the main town square here, but then you had a lot of stuff that went up the old state road. And then zooming in on our area, here is the courthouse. This is just inside the quarry property today. It's not quite in the slag pile, so you could actually do some digging here. I think the courthouse is maybe under a slag pile here. Actually, in the 1939 aerial photo, which is behind this, it looks like there's a tree here, right where she shows a large tree. And there's our dig site, Samuel Johnston house. And then just going back to that, this ad for the house for sale, I believe Samuel Johnston, he had just gotten married and he wanted to come to Columbia. He wanted to get into politics. And I believe he bought this house. He ended up in Winsboro later on, but he had actually 2 families. His brother was here also for a while. I think they probably stayed here from 1790 until about 1815 or so. And then there's things after Granby. The Granby Sniper. This is from the state newspaper, 1966. It describes Sherman. He camped in Old Granby, and as they came into town, his men started dropping dead from shots through the head. And they determined the area where the shots were coming from across the Congaree River, and they set up cannons and they blasted it. They went over and they found a 14-year-old boy dead lying next to his gun. And as this points out that that boy probably killed more Yankees than all the Confederacy did at Columbia. Where they got that information, I don't know, but I wonder if some of those balls we have may have been what went through the heads of some of those Union soldiers. Yeah, it was remarkable. In fact, they say in here that they felt bad about it because this kid was a really good shot, And here's some of the artifacts we found, which could come from that period. Now, I originally thought this was 22 caliber, which would be kind of rare for that period of time. I think that's just when 22 came out. But after we cleaned this, and I think it's back in the display there, I think it's more like 25 caliber. And here's that button. So these are possibilities. This is definitely a 22 caliber bullet, but we don't know the exact age of it. And here's some even newer things. So we know, I believe it's 3 girls and 2 boys grew up in that house in the 1960s. And then this item, took a little while to figure it out, but it's for cutting like grass in a field. It's a horse-drawn thing, and you can see it's lined up with all these little things, and the blade like slides in and out of this thing. So that's like could go into the early could be probably between 1900 and 1920 or that time period. And this is pretty neat. We don't know the exact age, but it's a copper anchor, and these are pewter pieces, but it still has the leather piece. So we're thinking we found this where we were digging over top of the gas line. So we think maybe when that was done, maybe 63, 64, it may have gotten tossed in with that. And maybe it's more from that time period. Here's some other things, circuit board pieces. So there's like a 60s or 70s pop top there. So what happened to Granby? And again, from the Congaree Store Count book, you see a number of entries for stuff like this, Jesuit bark, which is used for malaria. So people are having a problem with that. They don't know that mosquitoes are spreading things like that. But here's the epidemics, and it was always mentioned that Granby was especially hit hard with epidemics, and you can just see all through here this yellow fever. And then, of course, the development of Columbia took away from Granby. So, those were the things that really killed Granby. If it had been on higher ground, it would have been completely different. We'd be standing in the middle of the capital city of South Carolina right now. And what's going on now is I'm really surprised environmentalists haven't jumped on this. These quarries, you can't. I guess I used to think at one time, well, when they're done with the quarry, it'll just fill up with water, but that doesn't happen, right? The water's never going to go any higher than what the river is here. So, and you can see the water in the bottom of this. This is 400 feet deep right now. The slag pile is about 150 feet deep. And like on Greystone Boulevard, we have the green hole, and that thing, that's a further distance from the river, but that's about must be a good 40-foot drop. It only fills up that much. They try to keep it fenced in, but people cut the fence and kids jump, and you have to clear all this granite area. It's dangerous. A number of people have drowned in it because you get in there and it's hard to climb out. If you're not a good swimmer, you could be in trouble real quick. So, I'm afraid, they're supposed to, I think by law, they're supposed to get rid of that slag pile, put it back in there, but that's not going to fill it up. So it's really useless area. And now they're buying up property here in the Riverland Park neighborhood as part of a 75 to 150 year plan. So we're all going to be gone. It's like this Pfizer vaccine. They've locked up the records on that for 55 years, It's like, why would you lock up data on something? And they're putting it out of the reach of people, right? They want to make sure everybody's dead, right? Before they fight a battle And here's Sarah Friday's overlay just to show you the quarry hole, what's happened to things. You know, the Hart property is an opportunity. Here's the slag pile. So there's a little bit in here that could be done. And then right here, there's a little bit here, just inside the quarry property. But, you know, back to the 12,000 year history park, you know, this is in danger. It's Fort Congaree too and Granby, which is really, I think, a big part of the history park. You saw where we have stuff 10,000 years old in here. A new development here. I think this is also where a lot of Native American stuff has been found. I don't know that they'll ever build anything. They keep announcing they're going to do something here and then nothing happens. But the future of the Granby dig. So we're kind of thinking the dig may end this year. We're still finding a lot of stuff. And so DC Locke and I have talked about, you know, this book I've got here, Miracles to Yesterday, has about 1/3 of it is Granby. Yeah, that was done about 5 years ago. We found a number of things, so we want to update that information, but also include the new stuff, you know, Native American, African American type stuff, and just to get all the documentation out there. And of course, museum displays. I'd like to see a lot of our stuff end up in the museum here. So what you see there, you know, that's just kind of a sample right now when we do talks like this. This is probably the first talk I've done since in person with people since COVID. I did one talk about a year ago on the 12,000 year history park. That was a 2-hour talk trying to cover all of the stuff in the 12,000 year history park. But so yeah, so the book, and DC is also an artist. He can do a lot of Native American. He's an historical interpreter, also does some Native American stuff. So that's something I didn't really include anything on in that book. So we want to do that also. So we're gonna keep going for at least a little while longer. We're all getting older. You can look at pictures from the beginning and see we're all gotten bigger and older. It's 10 years. And so here's our current house. Here's where some of those display items are. And that's my mom and dad. They've been gone for 25 and 20 years now. But I wish they could have been here to take part in this. They would have loved it. And there's just a little bit about the 12,000 year history park, some of the things that have happened in this area. And if you want to know more, you can find all the projects are at historysoft.com. Or, you know, if you do Finding Granby, you'll be able to locate that and get to it. And I think that's about it. Any questions there? And you can stick around some and take a look at the artifacts back there if you'd like to. We'll answer any questions. Obviously we don't have all the artifacts here. There's 25,000 of them. I think it's 250 pounds and stuff. Yeah. Okay.
Once I'll give David a round of applause. If you like this presentation, please fill one out. You can fold it over and just leave it on the table for it. David, thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Andy, for having me. I enjoyed it.